right, guys, welcome to week 2 of the cardiovascular system and blood. I'm going to go over just a little bit of a review about what you should have gotten out of last week. I'm going to tell you what to expect from this week. I'm going to walk you through the activities that you'll be doing this week to give you maybe a little bit better of a sense of what you're doing for the activities. And then I'll talk a little bit about the summative assessment that you have coming up next Thursday on this material. So last week, you worked on the cardiovascular system web quest. You labeled the internal and external parts of the heart. You traced the flow of blood through the heart. These are two things that you're going to need to be able to do on the summative assessment. And I'll have those graded by the middle of the week this week. So if you have any questions there, let me know. Then in the ABO-RH exploration, you talked about the different types of blood cells, talked about what a blood type was, and what antigens and antibodies mean in terms of your blood type and why it's important to understand them when we're talking about blood transfusions. And then you talked about erythroblastosis fetalis and how it relates to blood typing. So you'll definitely need to know that on the summative assessment as well. So again, those will be graded soon. So I'll give you feedback on those. If you had any questions on any of those, I didn't get any questions on the portal. So I'm assuming everybody felt pretty good about them. But if you have any questions, please let me know. We're going to have a Zoom tomorrow at 9 for my class. I think Mrs. Broadhead's class Zoom is today. But just let me know if you have any questions on any of this. And I'm happy to walk you through it. So this week, we're going to take what we learned from the anatomy and physiology of the cardiovascular system, and we're going to apply it to medicine and real life patients, real life scenarios, and sort of see how it fits into the real world a little bit, which I think is easy to do when we're doing the online learning. Nothing you learn this week you'll have to memorize because you'll have everything in front of you when you take your summative assessment. So we can go into a little bit more detail because you don't have to worry about memorizing all of it. So while it might seem, beyond the scope of high school level anatomy, hopefully you find something interesting from this. You'll learn how to read an EKG. I'm sure you've all seen them before, but you'll actually be able to interpret what they mean and how they relate to the heart. And at some point, you've either gotten your blood taken or you will get your blood taken. You'll get a complete blood cell count back, and it will list all the different blood cells. So hopefully after this, you have some sense of what that actually means. So let's talk about the complete blood cell test first, or lab, the complete blood cell count lab that you'll be doing today, Monday. So what I want you to do, just read the background, read about platelets. Platelets, the scientific term for platelets is thrombocytes. These are the platelets right here. Read about red blood cells, which are also called erythrocytes. And then white blood cells, which are called leukocytes. So read about all of those. Take a look at the chart, different types of white blood cells. Talk about what a blood cell count, read about what a blood cell count actually is when they're done. And then you'll look at this chart. This chart is normal and abnormal blood cell count levels for the different types of cells. So white blood cells, red blood cells, platelets. What is the normal value? And then if the normal value is, or if the value is lower than normal, what are some causes for low blood cell counts in the different types of blood cells? And if the counts are higher than normal, what might that mean as well? So just read over this because you'll need to analyze this later in the lab. The procedure, you have 2 patients below. They have complaints. A blood smear is taken. You have a picture of the blood smear. And you will be observing it and diagnosing the patient. So patient 1, 16-year-old female, brought into the ER after she fainted while playing in a basketball game. She's been feeling fatigued and experiencing headaches over the last few weeks. So here are the instructions. What you do, you'll count the red blood cells. You'll do a couple calculations. Just read through this. It'll explain what to do. This is patient 1. These represent the red blood cells. These bigger cells represent the white blood cells. And then these little segments represent the platelets. So you're going to count the number of blood cells of each type for each patient. You'll also want to note the additional observations because these will help you determine what might be the cause of their problems. And then down here, so there's patient 1, patient 2. Down here is where you'll type in or write in your numbers. So the number of red blood cells on the grid, multiply it by 100,000. The number of white blood cells on the grid, multiply by 1,000. And the number of platelets on the grid, multiply by 10,000. So you're multiplying by a different number depending on which type of blood cell you're talking about. So just pay attention to that. And then down here for table 2, this is the results and diagnosis. So you should get an idea of whether the counts are high or low or normal based on this chart here. So are your numbers normal? Are they higher than normal or are they lower than normal? And depending on what you find, take a look at the causes and take a look at the additional observations because they might give you a clue there on what's going on. All right, so then you'll hypothesize your diagnosis. You might need to do a little bit of independent research, but I think overall this is pretty simple. On the summative assessment next Thursday, you will have another patient with a blood cell count and you'll basically just have to do the same thing. So this will come back, make sure you pay attention to what you're doing. Then next on Wednesday, after our Zoom, you're going to work on the ECG or EKG activity part A. Okay. So for part A, you're going to learn how to interpret an EKG, and for part B, you're going to get EKGs from real patients and practice reading the EKG and analyzing and diagnosing whatever problems might exist. Let me, hold on 1 second. Okay, so this is part of your PowerPoint, and we'll go over the rest of this PowerPoint after you do the EKG lab, sort of as a review for the summative assessment. But I just wanted you to look at this real quick. If you've ever been in the hospital or visited somebody in the hospital, you've probably seen a monitor that looks something like this. So up here, this top part is what we're going to be focusing on for the rest of this week for the EKG lab. This represents the EKG, and this is actually the EKG of somebody with a pacemaker, so it looks a little bit different than what you're used to, but this is what we're going to learn how to analyze today, or Wednesday. The middle number here is the oxygen saturation in the capillaries, so how much oxygen is in the blood, simply put. And then the lower number down here is the respiration rate, so how many breaths per minute the person's taking. Okay, so for Wednesday, you'll be doing, so ECG or EKG, just depends which part of the country you're in, or the world. But for part A, you'll just read the background, cardiac conduction. So the 3 main parts are the sinus node. So this is where the electrical system starts. Sinus node triggers the AV node, or the atrioventricular node. The AV node then triggers the Purkinje system, which you can see here in yellow. And the Purkinje system controls the movement of the ventricles, which at this point you should know pump the blood out of the heart. Then you can read about this here, read about the heartbeat, the different waves and intervals. We're going to be talking a lot about the waves and intervals. If we were in class, we probably wouldn't go into this in as much detail. But as I said, since you have the notes in front of you, I feel like we can take this opportunity to actually do some real life application here rather than just memorization. So take a look at the different waves and intervals. and how they correlate to the different parts of a heartbeat, because that's what you'll be doing in the lab. You'll see a higher peak means more electrical conduction, which means ventricular contractions because the ventricles pump the blood out of the heart, so they need more force, more electricity. The lower peaks are the atrial contractions. So take a look at this. Shows you a normal heartbeat, fast heartbeat, slow heartbeat, irregular heartbeat. And here again, atrial contractions, ventricle contractions, and the recovery wave. So read about that. You can watch this video. I'm going to change this PDF so that you can have the link here. The video just sort of shows you, it's optional, shows you what the peaks and valleys actually relate to. I think it might be helpful to you. And then you'll go to this website. And this website is going to give you all the information you need for the rest of the lab. So let's go there quickly. Here is the website. I think this is from a nursing program, but you'll click on EKG Basics. And you'll see there are 11 different sections over here. These 11 sections correspond with the lab. So you'll click on each one, and then each tab corresponds with one of these rows here. So if we're back here, click on EKG paper. That will help you right here. And then the next one will help you with the next one, and so on and so forth. So for these tables, what I want you to do is basically just answer the Q&A part. The diagrams might just help you answer the questions. Some of these, the diagrams have to be analyzed. So here, you'll have to analyze the diagram. You can do that by clicking on the fourth link there. It goes faster than it seems like it will go. And then, yeah, so all the information you need there is going to be on the website. And this is going to help you a lot with tomorrow's lab. All right, so that is the EKG part A. And then let's just look at the EKG part B lab. Here we go. All right, so for part B, which you'll do on Friday, you're going to apply the knowledge that you learned from part A into an actual patient's EKG reading. So here's the patient. In the analysis section down here, determine whether the characteristics of this EKG are normal or abnormal using what you learned in part A. Calculations will need to be done, and most responses are a simple yes or no. So you'll look at this table, you'll answer it. On the summative assessment, if you remember from the beginning of this, we watched that video on Brandon's story. He was diagnosed with AFib, and he was having all his surgeries related to AFib. You asked a lot of questions. Questions were good. On the summative assessment, we're going to give you an EKG reading of an individual with AFib, and you'll have to answer questions similar to this table and sort of figure out for yourself what parts of the heart AFib affect. So you're going to practice calculating the intervals, the R interval, the PP interval. You'll practice looking at the P waves, QRS intervals, T waves, answer these questions. You'll tell me if what you find is normal or abnormal. Is it consistent? And then down here in the diagnosis section, you're basically going to tell me overall what might be wrong with this patient. Think about what part of the heart might not be working. Is it the SA node, the AV node, the Purkinje fibers? Basically what's going on in their heart. And you're going to do the same thing for patient B. Now, we understand you are not cardiologists. This is really, intense information. So this is more than we would have ever expected from you to memorize, but do your best. See if you can come up with some sort of diagnosis here. And then, like I said, in the summative, we'll talk about this before the summative assessment, but then in the summative assessment, you'll do a reading from someone with AFib and answer similar questions to these.